Welcome to the Business Blox podcast, episode 20. We're recording this on the 6th of August as Victoria has just reached the strongest lockdowns or restrictions in probably the world with an 8 p.m. curfew, and we also need to provide work permits and other documents just to travel around to and from work. So as always, alongside me is Dale Kitchen. How is things working with the work permits?
Terribly. So it's been a absolute debacle, the rollout. That's why we're late on the podcast. We've been spending the past couple of days just trying to get our heads around it. The government seemed to set a date that they wanted to get the program in place, but didn't bother to get the back stuff ready before that. So they released forms. So there was original forms that were released, which employers need to sign. People started to do that. Then there was another form that was released later in that day that people needed to sign for people who wanted childcare. That was released at 6 o'clock, which was 6 hours before the deadline, after work had closed, meaning that people couldn't get into childcare the next day if they didn't have those forms. But they proceeded to roll forward with it. Daniel Andrews made the comment that he didn't want any leeway in the rollout of it, so he's very hard on that. So it's just been chaos, absolute chaos.
And have you had to knock a kid, like a kid's turning up that can't get into childcare? Like, does everyone have their forms?
Well, people are getting their forms. I know a lot of employees and employers worked hard to get their first form. So I'll get into it now. So there's 3 specific forms that can be filled out that are work permitted forms. So there's the actual work permit itself. So if you don't need childcare, you complete a work permit, and that allows you to travel around and do your work. That specifies who you work for, person of contact, the hours you work, and the shifts you're working on. So it spells it out. There is also an additional form that is the work permit plus childcare, which is exactly the same form, but has a little tick box for childcare. And you have to, so they released the work permit form first. Everyone filled that out and started with that. Then at night, they released the work permit with childcare form, and then everyone had to go back and get that form filled out again. So if people had that first form, which was the work permit form, we did let them come in. There were a few people who didn't have forms, and you need the forms for both people in your household. So this is specific to childcare. So if you want your child to come to childcare, they need to have forms for both parents saying that they're both working on those days and they don't have anyone to care for their children.
And grandparents?
There is also not advised for grandparents to be babysitters because of the COVID risk.
Yes.
There was also a third form that was released, which is a permitted worker working from home form, which means that if they're working in a permitted category, which we'll get into what is and what isn't later, but they're working from home and they don't have anyone to care for their children, they have to get that form filled out by their employer to drop their kids off at childcare. And all that was released and just said, here you go, guys, knock yourself out.
And make sure you have it.
Yeah, and you have to have it, or the fines are $20,000 for an individual or $100,000 for a company. So the fine for a incorrect or a false statement on a form is $100,000 if that's your employee, and it's $20,000 if you've just written it up yourself. So big fines. They're not playing around. They want the economy to slow down. They're giving figures about how much they want it to slow down, and they're really cutting things. So not only on top of that, everyone had to get their head across. There's also been specific changes to specific industries where they've had to cut their staff, even if they are a permitted work site, to a lower, safer number, and that differs from business to business, basically. Also, retail is no longer open, so you cannot run a retail store unless it's under the listed ones that are, which are sort of, chemists, supermarkets and all that sort of thing. So, but they can still operate if they do contactless collection or sort of postage as well. So it's a really a mixed message around, how people should be. So it's sort of saying, well, you should be closed, but then I can still open the store and put people in it as long as they're not serving customers. But how does that work inside the store? So that's sort of what everyone's trying to get their head around now. There's a COVID plan that they need to put in place, which sets out the steps that they can maintain their social distancing inside their premises. But yeah, there's a lot to get your head around at this point in time, and that's why we're running late on the podcast.
Right, very, very much. There's a lot to cover. So it sort of leads into now they've told you all the restrictions, they've locked down businesses essentially. What are they doing to support Victorians now? Because this is the same analogy as we want to build a highway through here. We need to take your house. Yeah. We're going to buy your house, but we'll pay you for it. It's the same situation for the welfare of society. We're closing your business. So how are they going to support business?
They haven't announced any new they haven't announced any new funding. The Victorian government has changed the accessibility of the $5,000 grant. So now if you're outside of the original lockdown area, which is the rest of Victoria, you can then lodge an application to get the $5,000 business interruption grant. You can only eligible for that grant if you have a work cover, registered for GST, employ under 600,000.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, and also you've got to be on JobKeeper.
And you have to be on JobKeeper, yeah. So it's a lot more limited set of numbers. They haven't announced any new funding for anybody. They haven't announced any new access to anything to help people out for rental for this new period. So the people that were planning to get through the original period and then open up roundabout now are starting to struggle. So the landlords who are planning to sort of start saying, hey, we need to start seeing a bit of money now that's starting to fall over. So it's really starting to get to a crucial time in the economy. There were indications, and I think it was the Prime Minister did mention that he was going to make some changes to JobKeeper to move that strict eligibility that if you were over more than 30% of your income month by month of your last year. So if July this year didn't drop by 30% compared to July last year, or August, or any one of those months starting from March, then you get kicked out of JobKeeper for the new after the September. They're looking to probably relax that, meaning that you can have an up month where you did earn more than last year, and then it comes back down again. But no announcements have been made, and no other funding at the moment. So we're on our own at the moment. It's been very challenging. A lot more people have been laid off this time. A lot more people who we've been speaking to today have said that they've been stood down for 6 weeks. Some of those people didn't have access to JobKeeper because the companies weren't originally eligible. So we're sort of working through those problems now, and seeing if now they can then come onto it. But it's only, what are we looking about? 2 months of JobKeeper, and we got 6 months of lockdown. So we'll get to the end. Yeah. So are those people going to get JobKeeper and get extended out into it? Maybe that's the way the funding's going to continue.
And you wonder that. So 6 weeks is the period we're working through now, but like the first lockdown, the stage release of things, the stage increasing of people at venues and all that process, it could be another 3-month process until we're back to so-called sort of normal operating hours, still under your COVID plan. But we did have a question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, numbers are still going up, which is the big problem. So I think we're still in the 400 to 500 sort of area this day. So until they start to come down, I think you still got 3 to 4 weeks after that period. So until those numbers start to drop, we're not going to see any lightening up in this current lockdown.
Yeah, Australia probably could break the record for the longest amount of some form of restriction around the world. Certainly, they're well ahead of Europe now in considering. Europe was only a few 3 or 4 weeks difference between Australia, and they've sort of moved on. But Australia's going again. But we did have a question around with lots of employees working from home. Can employers change their pay rates and change their? Do they need to continue with their hours of operation? Do they have to pay them at the same hourly rates? Is their penalty rate still applying if they're working from home?
Penalty rates will always apply. You don't lose the penalty section of the pays, but there was a change at the beginning of all of this, which is back at the original start of JobKeeper, that said if you did qualify for JobKeeper, you can amend the working hours for employees without any issues. So that the full-time staff can be put on reduced hours. They can be stood down for various reasons. They can they can be put off for 6 weeks, but only if you qualified for JobKeeper. They haven't had any clarification on that, and I don't believe that that's changed. So if you didn't qualify for JobKeeper, you aren't part of that new rule. So you still have to follow the old work relations rules. So, exactly the same as it was before COVID, basically.
Okay, so if you halved your work operation hours, you would still need to pay your full-time employees usual wages if you're not a JobKeeper company.
Yes, you would.
Okay.
But you would have to work out how they could be stood down. There may be provisions in the standards that you can get it done. But in that situation, I would assume that you would probably currently qualify for JobKeeper in the current month. So that qualification should get you into the rules, and then you should be able to sort of stand people off for the next few weeks. Yeah. But I would, get the JobKeeper first, and then look at changing the staff. Okay.
Well, anything else you wanted to add to that? How are people expected to deal through this period? Like, what advice have you been giving to customers and business owners that have touched base in the last 4 or 5 days?
So it's really been a case of we're talking to people about standing down their staff at the moment. So if they've got staff, paying out their annual leave, sort of working out if that's an affordable thing to do, because if they're not able to keep going with their staff at the end of this and they've got a large portion of annual leave, how do you pay those things? If I've had someone who's worked for me for 10 years and they love their job and they didn't take annual leave, now I'm coming down towards the end of a 6-week lockdown with no money. How do I pay out that entitlement? Sort of having those conversations. So is that something we pay down over the next 6 weeks, reduce their hours, pay their annual leave? That gives them money to live on. That maybe gives us a sort of soft ending, because that's sort of the things you've got to prepare for. Don't have any major overheads from any customers. So any debts that are starting to wane at the moment will only get worse, and then people that owe you money. So be vigilant on that. Make sure that you don't overexpose yourself. Don't pay an account. So if you owe $100,000 in an account and you've got $100,000 owing to you and that's connected, keep the payment with that payment, because the likelihood of the money not flowing through from the people who owe you could damage things, and just keep that cash in the business to float the operations. We're having issues with people sourcing products to sell. So there's industries that are running low on imported product for various reasons. So they're just not getting into the country. KFC, so they might be having
chicken.
There you go. It's the worst of the worst. So, there's a lot of problems happening at the moment that is, we're day one of the lockdown, and it's already starting to go, pretty pear-shaped. I'm just telling everyone, look at everything, look at where you can reduce costs. We're not too sure about what we should be doing about the overhead rentals again, whether we should be, going back to them and sort of saying, do we need to put things off for a bit longer? That sort of discussions that we will have. But it's just making sure that you can last at least 2 months, making sure that the cash flow is planned out for 2 months. If you can't do that, start looking around. Is funding something you should look at, or is it something that's not really a thing? And then, once this is all over, what does it look like on the other side? I think one of the biggest concerns is if retail doesn't get going before Christmas, then that's their busiest time of the year. Then there will be huge closes. So you'll see a lot of businesses going out of business. So we really, really need this to work. Fingers crossed it does get up and going, but manage your cost, manage it for 2 months at the moment. If you can get close to that 2 months and you need a small loan to get out to the other end just to keep things going, that's probably a situation that I'd probably look at. If you're looking at borrowing now to survive the next sort of 6 weeks, you'd have to look at that scenario. Talk to a professional, talk to someone about your position, and just really, do your hard numbers, because it's sort of it's going to be a big slowdown. I mean, it's really, this one's going to bite hard. This one, construction is going to drop to 25% of its normal turnover, and construction is going to have to flow onto all the suppliers. The retail having to actually close their doors will have issues. So, yeah, just do your numbers, do your research, plan. That's all we can do at the moment.
Yeah, we'll be feeling this at the end of the year. I think touching on communication as well. Communicate with your employees if they're in a situation where they are carrying annual leave. Tell them how things are. Talk to them through, and maybe you can come to some arrangement. And the same goes for your big customer. If they owe you a lot of money, talk to them about how they're travelling, what they're expecting, and the same on the supply side. If you tell your supplier, waiting on a big customer pay up, this is what we've sorted out payment terms, you can do the same on both sides, and it helps you understand and relax a little bit more about the stressful situation that's faced over the next couple of months.
The worst thing is to not say anything and people panic. So if you say to someone, hey, I got 50 grand sitting here, I'm waiting for it to come in, and then you just give them updates, he's screwing me around, we're not getting that money, they will be better, and they'll be happier at the end of that, even if you don't pay them, but you let them know along the way, because they start to go into freak out mode, and they worry that they're never going to get their money. Then the phone never calls, and it doesn't work. You'll get a lot further by working with people and just talking to as many people as you can.
Yeah, and for your mental health, like they started to talk a lot about mental health. I think your mental health as a business owner would be, the stress levels could be off the charts now. If you're told that you're not running anything, you can't go out and play, essentially. And
you've got work sitting there,
yeah.
Your work's sitting there, and you just can't do it. You're not allowed.
No fault of your own. Your marketing's successful. Your product's great. Your service is great. And they're saying, not today, sir, not today. Well, I think that's probably as much as we can sort of give. We don't want to overload people during...
Yeah, we've already been overloaded. I think that's
this interesting period. I think over the next couple of weeks, maybe if people have some free time, we'll get a few customers on to chat about how they're travelling, how they got to where they are with the business, what they do, and you'll hear about some successful business owners that from industries you may have never thought that how popular and how well performing they are.
I think so, and I think we'll give people a sort of a guide as to what they can do with their free time as well. So all that ample time, let's not put our head in the sand. Let's put it to good use, and let's make the most of it.
Yeah, the people building during this whole year, the ones that are building
Yeah.
and still working hard are going to come out flying when things pick up.
Yep.
Okay, well, mask on next week, I expect, Dale, and we'll continue from there.
We keep far enough apart, and I like it that way.
One day we'll do a podcast in the same room.
Probably not this year.
No.
Thanks, mate.
I'll speak to you later.